Imagine this for a second. A massive book, nearly 3 feet tall, weighing in at around 165 pounds, crafted entirely out of animal skin. Every single word in it was written by hand. Just picture the sheer dedication, the patience it would have taken to put this together. And it doesn't end there. This book, now famously known as the Codex Gigas, has another, darker name, the Devil's Bible. The reason? Legend has it that the book was completed with the help of none other than the devil himself. I know, it sounds like the stuff of old horror tales, right? But trust me, the story behind this book is so much stranger and a lot more fascinating than you might imagine. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the mystery of the Codex Gigas, exploring its origins, the meaning it carries, and whether or not there's any truth to this alleged demonic pact that's kept it steeped in mystery for centuries. But before we go further, let me ask you, have you ever come across this story before? Ever wondered how anyone could manage to write a book so huge, filled with everything from the Bible to historical records, scientific studies, and even spells? And supposedly, it was written in an impossible amount of time, all in one night. This is one of those tales that sticks with you. And by the time we're done, I bet you'll have a whole new perspective on it. So stay with me, because I guarantee you won't be able to put this story down once we get started. Alright, let's set the stage a bit. To understand where all this comes from, we need to look at where and when this book was actually created. We're going back to the early 13th century, to a Benedictine monk named Herman, living in a place called Bohemia, which is now part of the Czech Republic. Herman was a member of a monastery, which back then would have been a quiet, insular place, full of devout individuals, all focused on prayer and study. But Herman's story takes a dark turn. According to the legend, he was sentenced to a truly harsh punishment for breaking his monastic vows. Now, we don't know exactly what he did to deserve it, but the penalty was as grim as it gets. He was to be locked in a cell, left to die slowly of hunger and thirst. Imagine being told that. Faced with this horrific fate, Herman was desperate to do anything he could to escape his sentence. So, in a last-ditch effort to save himself, Herman came up with a wildly ambitious plan. He promised to write, entirely by himself, the largest and most comprehensive manuscript the church had ever seen. It would contain not only the entire Bible, but also scientific, historical, and medical texts, everything the church valued and revered. And here's where things get really crazy. He promised to finish this monumental work in a single night. Just think about it for a second. Even for the most gifted and dedicated writer, the idea of creating something of this scale in one night sounds utterly impossible. And it's right here, at this critical point in the story, that the real mystery begins to take shape. The legend goes that once Herman realized there was no way he could fulfill his promise, he did the unthinkable. He made a pact with the devil. The deal? In exchange for his soul, the devil would help him finish the book before dawn. And so by morning, the Codex Gigas, this massive, mysterious book, which has fascinated people for centuries, was complete. The result, one of the largest, most puzzling books of the medieval world, containing sacred texts, historical records, scientific writings, and an enormous illustration of the devil himself, spread across an entire page. So let's pause and really think about this. Why is this legend so captivating? Maybe it's because it combines religious themes, mystery, and even a touch of horror. The thought of a monk, someone who's supposed to be devoted to God, turning to the devil out of desperation, is something that just defies logic and at the same time sparks a powerful curiosity. Is there actually something supernatural at work here? Or is this whole story just a fantastical way to explain the impossible? To understand the Codex Gigas better, let's take a closer look at its contents. This book isn't just one single text, it's more like a collection, a kind of medieval encyclopedia. The first section is the complete Bible, both the Old and New Testaments. But beyond the Bible, it contains historical texts like the Chronica Bohemorum, Chronicle of the Bohemians, and medical texts, some of which were highly advanced for their time. It even includes magical formulas, exorcism rituals, and a penitential calendar that guided monks on how to atone for their sins. All of this makes the Codex Gigas much more than a religious book. It's a unique reflection of medieval life and thought, showing how religion, science, and mysticism were all deeply intertwined in ways that are almost unimaginable to us today. Now, let's get to what really gives people chills when they see this book. The famous illustration of the devil that takes up an entire page. It's a terrifying figure. Horns, claws, a long tongue, and an expression that's as menacing as it gets. What's particularly strange is that this image appears right in the middle of the book, right after a section that talks about heaven and sins. And this is where people really start connecting the dots, tying this devilish image to Herman's supposed pact with the devil. I mean, why else would someone put such a horrifying image right in the middle of a religious manuscript? But let's take a step back from the legend and dig into the facts a bit. Scholars who have studied the Codex Gigas have noticed something remarkable. The handwriting is shockingly uniform from start to finish. It's so consistent that they're certain it was indeed written by a single person. This is unusual because most medieval manuscripts were collaborative efforts. They were written by multiple monks, each with their own handwriting, so there would be natural variations in the text. But with the Codex Gigas, every letter, every word, looks like it was done by one hand. And this of course supports the idea that Herman dedicated himself entirely to this work, maybe even for most of his life. Now about this claim that he wrote it all in one night. Well, that's pretty hard to swallow. Studies estimate that even if Herman wrote every single day, it would have taken him at least 20 years to complete this book. Yes, 20 years. So that whole one-night bit is obviously an exaggeration, but the level of dedication Herman must have had is undeniable. Whether or not he had help from the devil, the fact that he devoted so much of his life to creating one of the largest manuscripts in history is almost supernatural in itself, don't you think? And here's something else that a lot of people don't know. The Codex Gigas has had a long, tumultuous history. After spending years in the monastery, it was taken as war loot by the Swedish king in the 17th century during the 30 Years' War. Today, it's kept under special conditions at the National Library of Sweden in Stockholm, where they're doing everything they can to preserve it. It's considered one of the true treasures of medieval history. But even after centuries of research, the mystery of its creation is still very much alive. There's something deeply fascinating about the stories that surround the Codex Gigas. They mix religion, mystery, and science in a way that feels timeless. And here's the part I find really interesting. Even with all the technology and knowledge we have today, we still can't completely explain this book. Maybe, just maybe, what draws people to this book isn't necessarily finding out if the devil helped write it, but rather the mystery itself. The unknown, as always, pulls at our curiosity, and as long as we don't have all the answers, the legend of the Codex Gigas will continue to intrigue us. And there's more to this story that I haven't even touched on yet. Imagine, this book, already over 800 years old, has survived countless historical events and conflicts over the centuries. Think about it. This huge, heavy manuscript managed to stay intact all this time, while countless other documents and artifacts were lost to wars, fires, and just the natural passing of time. During the 30 Years' War, for example, when the Codex was seized by the Swedish forces, it could have easily been destroyed or damaged. But instead, it was carefully preserved and eventually brought to Sweden, where it's still being protected to this day. It's mind-boggling to think of all the moments in history this book has seen, and yet it's still here, waiting to be discovered and explored. And here's another fascinating detail about the book itself. It's made from the skin of about 160 animals. That's right, 160 calf skins were used to make the parchment for this single book. In the Middle Ages, using animal skin for manuscripts wasn't unusual, but the sheer quantity needed for the Codex Gigas is truly mind-blowing. And because of its size and weight, this wasn't the kind of book you could just carry around or pass from person to person. Most likely, it stayed in one place in the monastery, helping to preserve it even further. Then there's the actual content of the book. One section that's especially intriguing to historians is the part with magical formulas and exorcism rituals. Right alongside biblical and scientific texts, these passages feel a bit out of place, don't they? It makes you wonder, did Herman have a particular interest in the occult? Or was it just common back then to include this type of material in religious manuscripts as a form of protection against evil forces? We don't have a definitive answer, but the fact that the Codex Gigas blends religious teachings, scientific knowledge, and mystical practices makes it one of a kind, almost like a window into the medieval mind, where religion, science, and magic coexisted in ways that are hard for us to imagine today. One last point that keeps scholars scratching their heads is the mysterious silence around the Codex Gigas for long stretches of history. Although it was created around 1229, there are very few records of it in the decades that followed. For a long time, it seems the book was largely forgotten, until it was rediscovered and gained fame because of its association with the devil legend. This makes you wonder, did the story of the pact with the devil only gain popularity later, after the book had traveled through the hands of many? Or was this a tale shared quietly among monks, only to be passed down publicly much later? To this day, the mystery surrounding the book's content and its impact throughout history remains unsolved. That air of something forbidden, something that shouldn't exist, only adds to the Codex Gigas' reputation as one of the most captivating manuscripts ever recorded. So let me ask you, what do you think of all this? Do you believe Herman really got a supernatural helping hand? Or is this just a wild story that's grown more exaggerated over the centuries? I'd love to hear what you think, so leave me your thoughts down in the comments. And hey, if you're into stories like this and want to see more, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. I'm here every week, bringing you mysteries, curiosities, and stories that might just make you see the world a little differently. Thanks for sticking with me, and I'll catch you in the next video.